Excellent.
Hi, Lena.
Hi there.
How are you? Welcome.
Good, thank you.
Good. We've got a couple people on here. Maybe we'll do introductions. So we'll see how big the group gets. But Dakota Casserly from planning staff, and Sherry Shatraw, she's a county planning board member. Lena, you're with, well, I know you work in the real property office, but you're also an assessor in Norfolk, is that right?
Yes, that's correct, since March of this year.
Great. Well, that's I'm sure a lot of work.
It is. a lot more than meets the eye, that's for sure.
Right. All right, I'm just gonna keep letting people in here, so. Hi, Bob. Hi, Ken.
Hey, how are you?
How we doing?
Good. Good to see you guys tonight.
Great.
Likewise.
We'll still waiting for Patrick here, but we'll just keep letting people in. I've just had people in the waiting room just to sort of control the access here. But hi, Priscilla.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Hi, Kitty. Hi, Jill.
Hello.
How's everybody tonight? We've got a good complement of people here from the public, and all right, there's Patrick Kelly. I was getting a little nervous. Patrick, our guest of honor here, hasn't signed in yet, but he's jumping on shortly, so I will let him in here.
Hey, Jason.
Evening, Don. How you doing today?
Pretty good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Hi,
Hey,
Julia.
everybody.
So,
Posting that webinar
oh, perfect. Thanks, Dakota.
from Tug Hill.
We're getting close to allotted time.
Right on time.
And also with attendance, so that's good. Just give people a minute or two, not quite 6 o'clock yet, and then maybe we'll go around the room, since we do have a limited number of people here. Hey, Patrick.
Good evening, Jason. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks a lot for joining and for doing this for us.
My pleasure.
I was just saying, we'll maybe not quite 6 yet. We'll just give people a minute or two to jump on. And then since we are a smaller group, I think we could maybe do a quick intro. I could just go through That's probably the easiest rather than everybody trying to say their name at the same time. And then we'll turn it over to you.
Sounds good.
Great. Sure, I don't have anybody in the waiting room here. Eric,
Hey, how's it going?
good. Hey, Dan.
Yep.
How you doing
You hear
tonight?
me?
We can.
Okay,
We can't see it. Dan Fay. We can see Dan Huntley, but not Dan Fay. But
That's because I'm much better looking.
oh, okay. I'll let you two duke that out. I'm not getting involved with
there
that
I
one.
am. I'm not sure why I'm not coming up, but I'm listening anyways.
All right. That sounds fine, Dan. Okay, well, it's a whoop. My video back on here. It's about 6:01, so why don't we get rolling here? I think I've got everybody pretty much that was on the sign-in sheet is here. We're missing just a couple, but we'll let them in as they join. Welcome all, and I want to maybe just start with an introduction of our guest, who I guess has stepped away from his his chair for now, but that's okay. We'll he's back now.
The chair does all the work, Jason.
Yeah. So Patrick Kelly is the executive director of the or the CEO, excuse me, of the county's industrial development agency, and has agreed to speak with the group here tonight on pilots. And there are a number of county planning board members here. We'll get to introductions in just a second. And the county planning board has been dealing with a number of projects, solar related, over, oh boy, probably the last 5-6 years. And a pilot discussion always comes up when we talk about solar projects. So I know Patrick and I have talked, and he's going to focus on pilots sort of in general, and then we'll talk a little bit about solar in particular, and then we'll open it up for questions. So I do just want to identify who's on the call here, so everybody sort of knows everybody. We've got a number of county planning board members who are going to have their regular monthly meeting at 7 o'clock, and anybody is more than welcome to stay on if they so choose. Of course, you don't have to if you don't want to. If you're here just for the solar or for the pilot discussion, that's great. But just with the county planning board, we have in no particular order here. We have Dan Fay, Ken Beller, Sherry Shatraw, Don Chambers, Eric Allen, Julia Rose, Kitty O'Neill. And then other members that have joined us, we've got Kate Shepeleff, we have Bill Bouchan. Bill, help me if I mispronounced your name. Bob Washoe, Darcy Frigo, Jill Molnar, Lena Kanitz, and I'm sorry, Priscilla Darling from the County Planning Board as well. Sorry, Priscilla, missed you first time around. I'm Jason Fotenhauer. I'm the Director of the County Planning Office. Also, here we have Dakota Casserly with the County Planning Office. We both staff the County Planning Board, and we want to welcome you to the training session tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick. Thanks,
I
Patrick.
think Dan Huntley was on.
Oh, and Dan too. Boy, I thank you, Dan Fay. I missed Dan Huntley. How can you're right in the middle of my screen, Dan? I don't know how I missed you there. Sorry about that.
No
Anybody
problem.
else that I failed to mention? I apologize.
His beauty overshined you.
That's right. I was blinded for a second there. All right, we'll let it go. Patrick, you should be able to share screens if you so choose, and take it away.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jason. Give it a second. Can everybody see that?
Yep, no problem.
Perfect.
Yes.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the forum, the opportunity. I use the phrase that I try to demystify the pilot process because sometimes I think there's confusion about how the IDA process works, what we do, what we don't do, our process, our procedures, and hopefully I'll help with that some tonight. And I've given similar presentations to the Association of Town Supervisors, the mayors, and the assessors group. So this is, something that I periodically try to stay in front of these various stakeholder groups, just so you have an understanding of how the IDA functions and what we try to do and what our process is. And also it helps me get input and feedback and stay connected with the various as I say, stakeholder groups and entities throughout the county. So thank you for inviting me. With that, I'll start moving through the presentation. So the IDA is a public benefit corporation. We are unique in as much as we are created by New York State legislation, but we are administered at the local level. So our powers, such as they are invested in us through state legislation. Our board is appointed by the County Board of Legislators. I have a 7-member board that has members from throughout the county. We have a staff of about 6.5 full-time equivalents, just in terms of administration and setup. Our mission is pretty simply job retention, job creation, and tax-based development. That's really what I think most people look at IDAs to try to accomplish, and that's pretty much how we're judged or monitored at a state level as we do our reporting and undergo our periodic audits. The activities that we undertake to accomplish our mission, providing financing packages. So we have a series of different tools and levels of participation that we can bring to projects. We function a little bit like a bank as a lender, primarily as a gap financer through our local development corporation. But there's also a series of IDA incentives that are specific to what IDAs can do that I'll talk about in more detail as we move forward. We market the county as a potential location for new business. So we are not the tourism marketing entity. We are more the industrial and economic development marketing entity. So in normal times, we spend a fair amount of time traveling to events and promoting ourselves in Ontario and Quebec and throughout the Northeast and the country, trying to attract new businesses to the area. We build buildings. We have built or rehabilitated now approximately 10 buildings in the county, representing about 240,000 square feet of space. Our latest project is the Newell Building in Ogdensburg, or the former Newell Building, which is a 72,000 square foot facility. In addition to that, we've built buildings. We have 6 in Messina, 2 that we've built in Potsdam, 1 in Canton, and 1 in Governor. So in addition to building the buildings, we also have different sites and property that we develop. We get involved with infrastructure, primarily as it supports other economic or industrial development activities. We work with the local, regional, and state and federal stakeholders. We are in near constant contact with the local developers, the local communities, our New York State partners, primarily Empire State Development and the New York Power Authority, also a whole series of federal development partners as we try to understand how their programs not only might help us directly or how we can utilize them in what we're trying to accomplish, but how the companies, the communities, and other entities throughout the county could benefit from the various programs that are out there. Right? And the last one, acting in a consultative capacity, I like to position the IDA as a clearinghouse of all of these different programs and services that are out there. As a business is functioning, it is focused on the day-to-day operations, on making its product or providing its service at a level that makes it money so it can stay in business. And there's not always the time or the resources or candidly the knowledge or interest to understand what might be out there to help. So I see that as a role for us. We do probably 80% of our work is in retention and development and expansion of existing employers within the county or helping communities. And the other 20% is on outside marketing, trying to bring entities into the area. I talked about financing and incentives, kind of a drill down into that category. We have about $8 million of loan funds that we directly administer through the IDA Local Development Corporation. We also partner with the Development Authority of the North Country and a series of other regional and local lending entities, as a lot of the projects we deal with are in the 50,000 to 1.5 million range, where there's a role for a gap financing participation of anywhere from 25 to 800,000 to $1 million. So the funds that we administer and that we package tend to be in that arena. Bond financing, we can issue tax exempt bonds. IDAs themselves have 4 specific ways they can impact the tax treatment of a project. One is through the taxable status of the debt on a project. So you might be familiar with a bond. We've issued bonds for, in the last few years, Clarkson, Canton Potsdam Hospital. That's tax exempt financing that they can then utilize as they're building new facilities or modernizing or upgrading their campuses or their hospitals. When we can take our tax exempt status and convey it onto the debt itself so that the interest is not taxed by the federal or state governments. That enables the entity that we're helping to have lower debt service, lower cost of borrowing, and help them complete their projects in a more cost-effective manner. The big exemptions that you hear more about are the mortgage recording tax exemption, the sales tax exemption, and the real property tax abatement. And those are the incentives that are typically more seen in projects, including solar, that we deal with more often than bond issues. And I'll talk about them as the primary reason of the presentation. Other programs that I mentioned before, we also facilitate the use of some of the state incentive programs in our projects. Typically, there's a layering together of all the various programs and incentives that might be out there to help move the project forward. So we might do a pilot with Corning and also coordinate their utilization of a low-cost power allocation from the New York Power Authority. So the idea is to bring all of these programs together in such a way that it accomplishes that mission of helping retain jobs, create jobs, and ultimately build the tax base. The specific IDA exemptions and abatements that you see locally, the mortgage recording tax exemption in St. Lawrence County, there's a 0.75% recording tax on a mortgage. So if we provide that exemption to a project, for every $1 million, it saves them $7,500. Sales and use tax exemption, we have the ability to exempt a project that is designated as an IDA project the full 8% sales tax that they might otherwise have to pay on materials. So in order to incentivize or induce a project to move forward, we can provide a sales tax exemption. So if a company wants to build a warehouse in addition to a factory or some other kind of qualified project, and they're going to spend $1 million on materials, they would pay $80,000 in sales tax. One of the incentives by New York state law that an IDA can offer is the exemption from that expense. And then the big one, and the one that you're hearing most about from a solar perspective, is the real property tax abatement or payment in lieu of tax program. Couple points about pilots. They are for the added value of new construction. So you'll hear, or I will hear somebody say, well, the IDA took this property off the tax roll. That is almost exclusively never the case. When we do a project, it is on the added value or the increase. A company that comes to us that says, I have a property that's assessed at $500,000 and I want to do an expansion, how would the pilot work? The $500,000 is the baseline that stays in place, and any impact of the pilot would be on the added value above and beyond that $500,000. We are required by law to have a uniform tax exemption policy that spells out how we do our pilots. And our policy is fairly straightforward. If we have what I will call a standard IDA project, which is one that is manufacturing, warehousing, research and development, more of a standard industrial project, and it utilizes our standard pilot schedule, which is that 10-year schedule laid out in the third bullet point, we can approve that project. We have a public hearing, and then the IDA board itself can approve a project. So if Corning comes to us and says, we're requesting a 10-year pilot, and it's going to be on an expansion of our manufacturing plant, they would apply to us. We would do our internal work, our cost benefit analysis. If the amount of the incentive provided is over $100,000, we would provide we have to do a public hearing, and then ultimately our board votes on it, and that is the process. Our uniform tax exemption policy spells out that if we deviate from that process, either by the type of project or by the pilot term, the schedule requested, then we require the consent of the local affected taxing jurisdictions. So if Corning were to come to us and say, we want to do a expansion, but we don't want the 10-year pilot, we want a 12-year pilot, that would require us, by our own policy, to seek out the consent of the town of DeKalb and the Canton Central School District. If a project came to us that was a housing project or a mixed-use development, that would require us to seek out the consent of the affected local taxing jurisdictions. I guess I'm going to pause right now before I move on. Are there any questions about these specific incentives and the interplay between our standard and our deviation policies? I'm hearing none. Jason, I've got my screen on so I can see the PowerPoint. If you see any questions come up, just interrupt me, okay?
Sure, will do, Patrick. And if people feel free to put something in the chat as well, if you would rather do it that way. Dakota and I'll monitor that and see if we got any questions there.
Yeah, I don't want to miss anything, but and there'll be time at the end, I think, for questions as well. But if something pops up, please either get Jason's attention or mine somehow, and I'm happy to answer it. But the important part is we have these three primary incentives that impact either a solar project or a small medium-sized local project, when it's a deviation, we have to secure the consent of the local taxing jurisdictions. And I keep saying that's part of our policy. An IDA by law has to lay out its standard schedule and its standard project type, and then what it does in the case of a deviation. What it does is up to each individual IDA. So an IDA could say, if we deviate, we're going to require a supermajority of our board, or we're going to require some other means of approving it. In our case, and this goes back to 1999, we've always used the consent of the local taxing jurisdictions, which we don't always get. And sometimes projects don't go forward, or at least with our participation, because of that. So that it's not, more often than not, we seek it out and we are provided that consent, but it's not always a slam dunk.
Patrick, one quick question on that taxing jurisdiction thought is, you mentioned, for your example of Corning, DeKalb, and the Canton School District, the county would also be a player there as a taxing jurisdiction?
It would, but by our policy, it's always been the local taxing jurisdictions.
Okay, so the county would not be a player there then?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So Bruce Green's not on the call, but I want to thank him for helping me with some data sources. I want to give a sense of scale and proportion here. Because I remember, and before I'm gonna hide it for a second. I remember there was a discussion at the County Board of Legislators meeting a few years ago about how much property was off the tax roll in the county, and the figure is, it's in the billions. And somebody said, well, we should check with the IDA. And at the time, the total value of all IDA piloted property was like $15 million. So just to give that sense of scale of where exemptions come from and how much of that is driven by IDA project activity, let me bring you to this slide. So there's this, and this, you can see my website citation on the Office of Real Property Tax Services profile. Anybody can go look at this. There's 67,000 parcels of property in St. Lawrence County. 27,800 have some kind of exemption or another. And a lot of that might be star exemptions. It might be that they're government property. It could be any number of exemptions. But and there's a code where you can look and see by community what the exact exemptions are. Total value, 9.6 billion. 3.5 billion, 36% for county purposes. So from county tax, for county tax purposes, 36% of that is exempt. There are a grand total of 40 parcels that have IDA connectivity to them. So in terms of scale and proportion, we have 40 parcels, 22 with pilot agreements. And the total value is 46 million, which is a bit misleading because over half of that is from our connection to a bond issue with Claxton Hepburn Hospital that shows that facility in our name. So the real number is about $20 million. So when you hear that we have $3.5 billion of exempt property, I point out that about 20 million of that has anything to do with the IDA. So, and on the one hand, I guess it's good, you can't blame us. On the other hand, maybe we're not busy enough and we should have more activity. So I think that could probably be looked at in two ways. But within those 22 pilot agreements, the pilot payments generate over $500,000 of revenue. So when you think of exempt property in the county, the good news is, as I talked about earlier, is we're trying to build the tax base. Those overwhelmingly, the properties that have an IDA exemption, there's pilot revenue coming from them, payment in lieu of tax revenue coming from them. And the balance of the parcels, or some of it is property that we own in industrial parks. Some of it, like I said, has to do with bond issues that we've done for tax exempt parcels because of the tax exempt bond issues we've done for the hospitals and colleges. But as you're looking at the big picture, just keep these numbers in mind. And solar projects in New York State. So
Patrick, sorry if I
Yes.
could just jump in, maybe before we jump to solar, there is a question in the chat that I'll just read. It's in a non-standard pilot, do compromises occur between taxing jurisdictions on how proceeds are divided or distributed?
That's a great question. Unless otherwise approved, a pilot payment has to be broken down on the same pro rata share as a tax payment. So when we get if we get $100 pilot payment, figure $60 of it is going to the school, and then the rest goes to the municipality, the town, and the county. So the county's not part of that. And let me also clarify, they're not the local taxing jurisdictions in our deviation, but they still get their portion of the pilot payment. So thank you for whoever asked that question. That's a good question. There is, if we went to all the jurisdictions and said, can we divide this up differently? It could be done, but we'd have to get everybody's approval. And I'm not aware of a whole lot of circumstances where that would happen. And that's where you'll see sometimes host community agreements come into play with larger projects or with wind projects because of the impact in particular on the towns. So sometimes you'll see an add-on, which is typically separate from a pilot, but an add-on where there's some kind of host community arrangement.
Thank you.
Solar projects in New York State. So I think I'm sure there's some familiarity. I know with the folks on the planning board who've been reviewing these things now for some time. But the New York State has certain climate goals. They're listed here. This has been driving activity all over the state. And that last bullet point is supposed to be 2050, not 205. But I'm dealing with my counterparts, and there are dozens of projects. We're working on probably 20 to 30 projects in St. Lawrence County. There's dozens in the region, and it's getting into the hundreds around the state in terms of these community solar projects in particular. And all the projects that we've approved so far or have closed on have been community solar projects, the ones that are up to 5 megawatts. We are in discussions with some of the larger ones that are planning the utility scale, the 180 megawatt, the really big ones. But to this point, I don't have any applications from them. It's all been in the discussion stage. And I'll walk you through our process next that shows, what those stages are. But the community solar projects, they're not on-site facilities. It's one that's in the town of Madrid where everybody in the utility area can utilize it. I think you guys are familiar with the differences between community and utility scale, but just let me point out, so far they've all been community. Real property tax law 487, that offers a 15-year, 100% abatement from taxes for these projects. Jurisdictions can opt out of that, and those that do can still, and those that opt out, or even those that do not, can still require a pilot. So a jurisdiction can have a pilot itself up to 15 years with these developers directly without IDA participation. However, most of the developers want longer term, and there's a whole other series of reasons that's driving IDA involvement that I'll talk about as we move forward. Any questions on the solar landscape as it is in New York State? All right, my pilot process flow. And this would be the same for any kind of project except a standard one. And in the case of a standard one, we wouldn't have the consent resolutions. But as we work through these projects, here's what's going on with us. We get contacted either directly by a developer. We get referrals from the county planning office. We get referrals from town supervisors, town code enforcement officers. We are being connected with these projects as they are materializing and developing. Back to the real property tax law 487, a jurisdiction has 60 days from the time they're notified to tell a project whether or not they want to pilot. There are some that were built and constructed and are underway in the county right now that have no pilot and are taking advantage of that 487 15-year, I'll call it a tax holiday. I don't know that any new ones are surviving the 60-day process without being told they need a pilot. I think the ones that there was and the developers are all over the place in terms of their approach and the way they operate. But there was a time where there was kind of a land rush to sort of notify quietly and hope you didn't hear anything back. I think to the county's credit, there has been a lot of coordination at this point between the county board office, with the county administrator, with Jason and the planning office, where I think we're pretty well coordinated at sharing information and making sure that if one of these comes through, that there is at least the opportunity for them to be made aware that somebody expects pilot revenue right away. So we have these conversations. A lot of them are speculative with the utility scale ones right now. I've talked with some of these developers for 3 or 4 years at this point. With the community solar, sometimes they come in, they come out. We really don't start our official role until we get an application. And that's just because of how much time you could spend on these. If they don't pay us, we've increased our application fee for renewable energy projects to $5,000 because part of this whole speculative nature is there's a number of projects that seem to always be in the development stage and don't happen. And if they don't happen, you can put a lot of time and energy and resources into them and have no offsetting compensation for that. So we've increased our application fee modestly. Once we have an application, if it is requesting something, and this is, I'm talking for any kind of project, if it is requesting something besides our standard pilot, our standard 10-year pilot, and it's from a kind of project that requires a deviation, our next step is to reach out to the local taxing jurisdictions. So we talk with the school, typically the superintendent, the town supervisor, if it's in a village mayor, or whoever they would designate. And we say, we have this project. We have a conversation with them, very similar to what I'm explaining to you, where I talk about, here's how our process works. Here's how a pilot works. Here's what a deviation is. Here's what we're going to require from you. And then if the project moves forward, we work and provide them a consent resolution where essentially the taxing jurisdiction says, we consent to these terms and conditions for the pilot. So it's a 2 or 3 page resolution. Sometimes there's another 2 or 3 page consent certificate, but it basically says, we agree to this payment amount, this term. And then at that point, once we know what the proposed project incentive is, we then have our public hearing. We provide the public hearing. Right now, we're doing them through this kind of platform, but typically it's in normal times it'd be held in the community where the project is located. Once we have the public hearing documents and that's been done and we have the record of comments, we then bring it to our board. There is a process where our board reviews them, does an evaluation, and then if it's approved, we move to the closing, the billing, the documentation, and reporting. So that is sort of a thumbnail sketch of what happens when somebody comes to us and says, I want a pilot for my solar project. Send them the application. Once we get it back, it triggers the rest of this process. No process that we're involved with is without its share of documentation. And solar projects in particular, I want to make sure people have a sense of what goes into getting one of these projects from approval to pilot payment stage. I mentioned the application that we get, and our application, it's about a 20, by the time it's a 10 or 12 page application, by the time you're done with attachments and other exhibits, it can be anywhere from 20 to 200 pages. The consent resolutions that are drafted for the taxing jurisdictions, we have a project description that goes in our public hearing notice, a cost benefit analysis where we have to do an analysis of what is the proposed incentive request, what is the cost to society for our activity here, and then what is the benefit. And the benefit of a typical project is jobs, tax base. Obviously, with these projects, they're not big job creators, so it's more driven by pilot revenue and then the other associated benefits that come from renewable energy. We generate a project approval resolution for our board to vote on. If our board approves it, it then triggers the creation of a series of what I'm going to call closing documents. So there is a lease between us and the project developer. And this is outside of the underlying lease between the project developer and the landowner. So we are tax exempt. The way we convey our tax exempt status on a project is by taking a leasehold interest in it. So the developer has this property, they lease it to us. We then in turn lease it back to them. That's the lease back document on this list. And then attached to this lease and leaseback arrangement is the actual pilot agreement itself, the payment in lieu of tax agreement. And within the pilot agreement, we're building in decommissioning plans that either are based on the town law or the town requirement, or in the absence of one, based on one we've generated, based on what we're seeing in the other town laws and town requirements. So we require a decommissioning plan and some kind of financial assurance as well. So a bond or some other financial demonstration and documentation that the decommissioning can be paid for. There is a project agreement that lays out, here are the terms and conditions. Here is what the IDA is providing. Here's how all of this works. It's a summary of the incentives and our role in the project. There is a recapture agreement, which is, here's what happens. Here's how you're supposed to perform. Here's what happens if you don't. Real property tax law, or real property tax 412A form. That's what we send to the assessor. When all of this is done, we send to the assessor, to the town, to the school, to the county. Here is official notification of the IDA's participation in this project. This is the property, this is the schedule, this is the pilot. That's our way of notifying the impacted jurisdictions of that we've arrived in your world with this project. And again, none of them won't know this because we're involved through every other step in that process, that flow chart I showed you before, but that's the official notification. And then in our pilots, they range 20, 25 years. Some have requested 30. Every year, we have to do an annual certification statement and report on these projects, as we do for all. And this documentation path is consistent with every IDA project. So whenever we do a pilot, this is the paper chase that follows. Every year we find out about what the status of the project is. Is it in operation? If there's job creation requirements, are they meeting them? If there's investment requirements, have they made them? Annual Paris filings. Paris is the public authority's reporting information system. We have to report on every IDA project we undertake to the authority's budget office, to the New York State Comptroller. Copies of this are sent to St. Lawrence County and are posted on our website. So if anybody ever wonders, well, what's going on with IDA solar projects? It's all out there. It's all reported numerous times in numerous locations. The important thing to the jurisdictions is the annual pilot billing. What we plan on doing, and I say plan on because this is a lot of this is ongoing. It's happening now very quickly. We're closing on some of these projects and they're still not even built yet. They're not finished. But the annual pilot billing will happen once a year. So what we will do is we will bill for projects after the first of the year based on the pilot schedule. And most of these are all of these are per megawatt pilot schedule. So 5,000 per megawatt. If it's a 5 megawatt project, the first year bill will be $25,000. That we take in the 25,000. It then gets divided up according to the pro rata share for each taxing jurisdiction, and then we mail a check to the jurisdictions. And all the pilots typically have a 2% escalator over time. So the next year we'll bill 25,000 times 1.02. We'll collect it. We'll send it out. I have believe it or not, I have simplified and condensed some things within this list, but that is the overall documentation trail for an IDA pilot. Any questions on that documentation?
Patrick, I do have one from the chat here that I'll read as written here. Has the requirement of a decommissioning plan been applied to any other industry or just to solar and wind?
We have not done any wind, and I cannot think of an instance where there's been a decommissioning plan with any other kind of pilot I've been involved with. I mean, most of our pilots, and I'll show you all of our pilots in a moment, but most of them are manufacturing. So the notion of, you have to tear down the building, it's not unheard of. There are some where there is, return to, previous condition, but it would typically be with a project where there's like a cogen plant, where the cogen plants took a leasehold interest in property owned by New York State or a college or something like that. Then you might see some kind of decommissioning, but in a traditional or standard IDA pilot, no, we don't typically have that.
Thank you for that. I guess the reason I asked is because we did include it in the town of Canton law, but it's specific to solar, but it seems like it might have broader appeal perhaps in other industry, gas stations, for instance, in our code, where sometimes, the municipality's left holding the bag after someone picks up and splits. So I'm just curious if you've applied it anywhere else, but it sounds like it's sort of new with solar as far as cleaning up.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. So where we are right now, we have approved 23 projects all over the county. 7 of them have closed. So 7 of them are somewhere, all this is done up to the, the annual reporting that will come next. 5 to 10 more are in the development pipeline where we're talking with including some of the utility ones. 90 megawatts of renewable energy capacity has been approved. The 7 represent 26.35 megawatts. The current taxes paid on the 23 parcels is about $50,000. The first year pilot payments on the improvements will be $425,000. So it's a considerable increase. And I will point out the way what we are doing, and this is with the real property office and with the assessors, typically now with an IDA project, we create a slash parcel for the improvements. So we started this 7 or 8 years ago, when we did the Mizert's warehouse expansion in Ogdensburg, you had a parcel with an assessment of about $500,000. Rather than coming in and placing the IDA lease and lease back on the whole parcel, we said we won't touch that parcel. We'll create a new slash parcel that will represent the 10,000 square foot addition to their existing 20,000 square foot facility. So the main property stays on the tax roll, those tax payments keep being made, and then the pilot itself is just on the slash parcel. So let's assume all 23 of these projects close, and I don't believe they will, but let's say they will. That would mean the $49,443 in current tax payments would continue. And then in year one, the jurisdictions would also get $425,878. And then that would increase by 2% through the life of the pilots. The other impact, obviously, the community solar participation. I'm sure people are getting mailings at home saying you can sign up for Nexamp, you can sign up for Omni, you can sign up for any of these and save 10% on the supply or on the commodity portion of your bill. And then there's also the property owner lease revenue. Somewhere in, we're seeing 700 to over 1,000 per acre that the property owners are receiving from these projects. So there is hopefully a wealth stream being generated that will have a positive impact in the communities as property owners have that money and it starts circulating throughout our economy. Pilot considerations, and these are the things that we talk directly with the taxing jurisdictions about. The ease of administration. Once a jurisdiction approves the consent resolution, essentially, I'm not trying to be flippant or silly here. We tell them all you have to do then is fill out the deposit slips. Because, in particular, let's say you're a school district, I've just approved a pilot. Now for the next 20 years, the IDA is going to send me a check every February. And it certainly simplifies the involvement and participation. And as you see in my third bullet point, the documentation, time, and cost savings for the jurisdictions. Experience, the IDA, we've been doing pilots for almost 50 years. So I think when a renewable property developer rolls into town and wants to talk to somebody who's not fluent or has experience with a pilot process, I think there's an inherent disadvantage in that conversation that hopefully we can level the playing field. I told you about our documents. So we bring the recapture, the decommissioning, the project performance requirement to the pilots every year for the life of the pilots. I'm trying to have an equitable process throughout the county. So and I'm not picking on these companies because they do it. I'm picking on it because they're fresh in my mind. If Nexamp or Omni or Green Street Power Partners, I don't want Governor and Canton or Madrid meeting with one another and finding that, geez, these guys pulled one over on me because somebody got a better deal than I did, or somebody has a different treatment than I got. We're trying to bring some consistency and, like I said, an equitable treatment to the process throughout the county. I mentioned the integration with Jason and his staff. They send us project lists. We send them project lists. I think we're pretty well hand in glove talking about how these projects are being moved through the process or what the impact is. And I think we share the common view of we're trying to get the most for the impacted jurisdictions because of these projects. We're trying to bring the most benefit, I guess, out of the projects that we can for the county and for the local communities. Project flexibility, the ability to do 20 years, 25 to move back. And while we're trying to be consistent, we're also trying to be mindful of the different, we're unique. We have 2 different power zones in the county. So there is different impacts on different projects based on interconnection costs, based on the project's where it is in its lifespan, timeline, that kind of stuff. And then hopefully we're seen as a helpful local partner where, Bob, I know before, Bob Washoe, you've called me and said, hey, I have a question about this. We differentiate ourselves in the bonding process from the dormitory authority by trying to be local, trying to be responsive, trying to be just a better option for people than what else might be out there. And I believe working with us because of all these bullet points, I think is in the best interest of the communities. And hopefully it at the end of the day is getting us some order and some consistency in all these projects, which are, just so you know, comparatively kind of coming at us at light speed. And you'll see in my pilot map in a second what I mean. So these are my active pilots right now. If you look around the county, we've got, and that's not a misprint, I've got 3 pilots with Corning right now. I mentioned AJ Mizert, Hoosier Magnetics, DeFelsco, Anson, US Ecology, which used to be Optech, Current Renewable Energy, Fockler, New York Power Tools, Amtech Yarns, St. Lawrence Gas, From the Heart Cabinetry, High Peaks Winery, The Quarry, in Potsdam. The 2 that are a different color, these are ones that went through the deviation process. So this one was a longer term pilot that's for a mixed use housing project. This is a gas line expansion where they requested a 15-year pilot. So for this one, we had to get approval from the town of Brazier, the town of Norfolk, and I believe the Messina Central School District, St. Lawrence Central, and I think Norwood, Norfolk as well. So there was, that's why these 2 are a different color. Most of them, as you can probably tell, are in industrial parks, like my ones up in Messina, or they're pretty standard, distribution, manufacturing. This is the about 20 projects that represent that $18 to $20 million in assessed value, not counting solar. That's the impact of these solar projects around the county. I mentioned renewable properties, I mentioned Nexamp, and I mentioned Green Street. So you can see those are the 7 that have closed. There are, I think, another, like I said, 15 or 16 that are teed up, and another half dozen to a dozen that are in the pipeline. The process is, we have tried to take these changes in the law. I know people are familiar with real property tax law 575B that is trying to bring some consistency to the assessment model. What's the impact of that on pilots? A little early to tell, but it may, that gives consistency in how these things are valued. One of the things in my cost benefit analysis I have to determine is, what are they getting through the pilot? What would they be getting without the pilot? And that's been difficult because the assessors have challenges like, geez, how do we assess? As new as these things are to us, they're new to them as well. This will help bring a little consistency and clarity to that process. And from what our analysis is, we're not seeing huge deviations between the pilot values and the 575 calculations. It doesn't look like it's this huge discrepancy. But in terms of getting financing for the project backers, the financing entities, like the certainty of the pilot process and the payments, it's one of the things that they can build into the model and know where it's going to go for 20 or 25 years. I know I am flat up against the time. You've got my email, you've got my phone number. I know you have Jason's contact. He can obviously facilitate you to me, but if you have questions, Rich Williams from my office, who's a project manager, has really taken the lead on our solar project activity. But between the 2 of us, if there's questions, if there's something that we can provide, I want our role to be helping make any kind of project easier or simpler or more valuable or effective for the communities. These are a bit of a departure. I mean, if I could have all of these be little factories around the county, that certainly probably that would be my preference. But that said, in a, when you try to have a broad portfolio of activities that you're undertaking and projects you're working on, certainly there's a place for renewable energy and what we're trying to do. That's what I have. Sorry, I'll leave it, Jason, to you if there's any additional or final questions.
Patrick, that's really, really great. Thank you very much. And we do have a few minutes, so if there are any questions, please feel free. Just go ahead, unmute yourself and ask, or throw it in the chat, and I'll read it out here, whatever anyone's preference is. All right, going once, going twice. I think we're all set. Well, Patrick, I found that really
Demystifying?
No. I do see a couple. Okay, they're coming in fast now. Let's see. I don't understand this question. Any new thoughts on the Norfolk project? Just wondering, Patrick, I don't know if you know of a Norfolk project.
Well, it's probably Northside Solar.
Oh, the big one. Yeah.
No, that's one I will tell you in the range of developers. My counterparts down in the southern tier compare the early days of renewable energy activity with the fracking days, where you had the people rolling into town and they're trying to have dinner with a town supervisor and whip out a document and say, go ahead, sign this. We've dealt with some of that approach. When you look at the hierarchy, Next Era, which is the company Florida Power and Light subsidiary behind the Northside project, they're on the upper end of the scale of the approach, and the Article 10 process kind of demands that. But we're waiting for an application from them. Lots of conversations. We've talked with the town of, I went to the Messina School Board, did a similar presentation to this month or so ago. And I know that they're in fairly regular contact with the towns out there. That's a unique project. It's so big. It is in 3 towns, but only 1 school district. And what we're going to have to kind of do some math work on, not just the breakdown of the pilot payment by way of pro rata share, but also by way of where it's in, which town, what's in what, where are the panels, where is the connecting equipment, where's the interconnect. And one like that, none of the ones we've had so far have had host community agreements. I don't see a real fit for them with the community solar, but when you get to one like that, I expect there will be room for that in that project, which may address some of that. How do we handle a fair breakdown of the geography where the actual project is? And there's another, I didn't talk about the build ready. You might hear about the Benson Mine solar project. So you got community solar, you've got utility solar, and then NYSERDA is also trying to incentivize and induce solar solar investment in otherwise underutilized properties like landfills, like tailing piles. So they're going through and trying to do like a pre-permitting to get projects like that ready, where they can go find a developer and just turn the switch and say, here you go. So there is no developer, there is no project there yet, but they're trying to build the case for it and then find the developer. And Jason has done yeoman's work providing information on county parcels that we've tried to get into that program for NYSERDA, because that's really the home run. If you can find somewhere where there is a, an absolute lack of use or lack of productive activity happening. And those are the pilots I like to do best anyway. If we're doing a project like the Newell building where it's been taken for back taxes and it's off the tax roll and you can find a pathway to getting it back, that's kind of the sweet spot of what we'd like to be doing. That's what NYSERDA is trying to do with that program.
Thank you, Patrick. I do have two last questions here in the chat. Maybe if it's okay with County Planning Board members, we'll just take a minute into our designated start time here. The first is, what is the percentage the IDA receives for solar? I'm assuming that's for solar pilots.
We charge, and people ask, do you charge a fee? Yes, we do. We charge 1% of the benefited project amount. So if there's a solar project that's $5.5 million, our fee would be $55,000. And the application fee I mentioned gets credited to that. And then we don't charge an ongoing fee. So for the, and that's something we've looked at. There are other IDAs that charge a project monitoring fee over the course of a pilot. We do not. We don't get a cut of the pilot payment itself. It comes in, and by law we have to send it back out within 30 days. But that is our project fee.
And that's for all projects, right, Patrick? Not just
Correct.
solar. That's for all projects. Okay.
Okay,
Thanks.
okay.
And then the last one here I have is NYSERDA investing in small wind yet? And I'm not, I don't know. I've got some thoughts on that, Patrick, but why don't you go ahead first?
Well, so Patrick, hold on, this is Kate. So my question is NYSERDA doing any incentives to help you with small wind versus the big wind?
That's a better question probably for a Ken Visser. You're talking something like ducted turbines, like small. So are you talking?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking.
There are value stack programs that help incentivize the implementation of those kind of technologies. I don't know how aggressive it is. I mentioned the Newell building. We looked at that. Is there something we could be doing there? And this is terrible, but it's on a hill with a large lawn, and I'm thinking, let's cover the lawn with something. I don't care if it's solar panels or small turbines. And we looked at that, and because of the orientation of the site to the sun and the wind, it didn't really work. It was surprising to me how expensive it would have been to try and do that, and how there wasn't as much offsetting incentives as I would have thought.
Yeah, solar seems to get way more incentive than, for at least the homeowner, than wind. So.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick, very much. I really appreciate your time tonight, and this last image that we have up here, that's a great shot of basically all the activity that you have going on, both solar and your other pilot activity throughout the county. So
and I'll point out, this is specific to pilots. This is not the loan programs or any of the other stuff. I mean, it's hope, like I said, hope springs eternal. We're going to be approving another Corning project soon, which is a very nice one. So there's, the solar stuff is definitely taking some bandwidth, as you guys well. I'm sure the planning committee, the planning board, it's certainly taking time on your agendas, I know, and it's whether it's going to be, how long it's going to go on for, I don't know, but it's certainly busy right now. I'll let you guys go to your meeting.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Patrick,
Thank you.
Thanks,
thank you
everybody.
very much.
Take care.
Thank you, Patrick.
You're welcome. And contact me directly if there's any follow-up. I'm happy to talk to anybody.
Will
Super.
do.
Thanks, Patrick. Take care. Have a good night. Appreciate it. Okay. All right, thank you all. Of course, members